2023 was a year of contradictions. It was a year that I felt the least motivated to watch seasonal anime since I started this channel. And it was also a year where I finished the most seasonal anime since I started this channel. It was a year that featured 0 shows that I gave a 10 out of 10, which is weird considering how liberally I give out my 10 out of 10s. And it was also a year where half of my shows that ended up in my top 10 got a 9 out of 10, and only 1 or 2 usually get those per year from me. It was a year that I don't hold in too high esteem when comparing to other years. But when I look back, I see a lot of stuff that I really enjoyed. In short, 2023 was sneaky good. So let's start with the movies. Tunnel of Summer was this year's prerequisite, high-budget, high-concept, high school summer anime rom-com. And after dealing with numerous ripoffs of Makoto Shinkai's Your Name, this one is the most blatant of all of them. I cannot express how excited I was to watch Tunnel of Summer and ultimately how disappointed I was with the final product. Our main characters have 0 personality, 0 chemistry, and as a result give us 0 reason to care about their pairing. Some movies can get away with this problem by featuring some strong secondary characters, but this isn't the one. It doesn't look bad. It is a high-budget summer blockbuster after all, but nothing looks particularly inspired or original. The worst visual offense is how unappealing the titular tunnel in this movie looks. It's just an unpleasant thing to look at, and that's a problem considering that 20% of this movie's runtime takes place in that tunnel. That may be an exaggeration, but it certainly felt like 20% anyway. This is a 5 out of 10 movie. I don't mind Shinkai ripoffs in practice, but if you're thinking of watching this, you're just better off watching a Shinkai movie. Speaking of which, Suzume is superstar director Makoto Shinkai's 5th feature-length film, and 2nd since his breakout 2015 international blockbuster Your Name. I actually watched this movie when it came out in theaters in the spring and completely forgot to include it in my spring review. It features our high school hero Suzume as she discovers a mysterious man and a world-destroying secret all in the same morning. If this setup sounds familiar, you might remember it from classics like Your Name and Weathering with You, because no one rips off Shinkai like Shinkai. But Shinkai's a great director to rip off because his stuff is fun and beautiful and emotionally resonant. Suzume is a road trip movie, first and foremost, and it separates itself from its predecessors by taking on this swashbuckling, chase-heavy ethos. The themes are just as heavy as you'll find in Your Name and Weathering with You, but the tone itself is a lot lighter, and I think that Suzume is better off for this change. Especially with the cathartic reveal at the end, a reveal that I think brings more pathos than any other reveal that we've gotten in a previous Shinkai movie. So yeah, Suzume was great. I give it a 9 out of 10. And for a while, I thought Suzume would be the biggest theatrical anime release of the year, but Miyazaki. The Boy and the Heron features our elementary-aged Mahito as he accustoms himself to a new life after his mom dies in a hospital bombing during World War II. He finds strange creatures in his new residence, and he follows these creatures into a strange new world distinct from his own. A lot of the discourse surrounding this film revolves around Miyazaki himself, since this is likely the last feature-length project that he will helm. And if this is indeed a coda to Miyazaki's robust career, then it's a fitting one. It has all the Miyazaki stuff, from strong female characters, to environmental themes, to middle-aged architecture, to boats, to planes, to cars. It has so much of his trademark stuff. Too much stuff at times. The Boy and the Heron feels like Miyazaki taking all of the ideas he has left in his brain and jamming them into this feature-length project without any regard of fit or style. It's exceptionally animated, of course, and immediately retro as it fits in with his previous style, but I also find it the least essential of his magnificent body of work, so I give it an 8 out of 10. Normally I would do this in ascending order of score, but I just like the transition between Tunnel of Summer and Suzume too much. And as for stuff I don't like, Oshinoko examines the dark side of the Japanese entertainment industry, primarily in the film industry and secondarily in its idol culture. Its release was so hyped that its first 3 episodes was turned into a 90-minute movie that got a theatrical release that made a ton of money and got so much press for the rest of the season. And as a result, the show became one of the biggest and most hyped of the entire year. I'm not going to call Oshinoko bad because I liked it enough to finish it, But I genuinely did not like the opening movie, and only after some curiosity got me did I even begin to finish the rest of the season. There's an edgelord aspect to this movie that I don't really vibe with, as well as a harem aspect that doesn't really do anything for me either. But while this show hits expected anime summer blockbuster tropes, it also does a few things exceptionally well. The show's 6th episode, Ego Surfing, shows how social media dogpiling can affect the mental health of public-facing figures. And it's genuinely one of the most effective and paralyzing and wonderful episodes of television that I watched all year. But for every ego surfing, the show also has 3 or 4 episodes that don't really do anything for me. I think the romance in the show is bad and the comedy is worse, and that takes up like 2/3 of the runtime. And that isn't to mention our sullen and overpowered hero, someone who I never really connected with. I get why most people like it. I think I'm just too old to care, so I give it a 6 out of 10. My Happy Marriage features our Meiji-era damsel in distress forced to be a servant for her vindictive adoptive family, who then select her to marry one of the meanest bachelors in the city. It's part Cinderella, part Beauty and the Beast, and does neither of these classic stories justice. Narratively, My Happy Marriage doesn't have a single thing going for it. Our hero doesn't ever stop being a damsel in distress, and our knight in shining armor, kind of the same. Our vindictive family is so unbelievably mean with no nuance or dimension to give us any understanding of why. And I simply don't understand the magical elements, or why they're even here in the first place. The only reason I finished the show is because I legitimately found it one of the most beautiful visual spectacles of the year. And this year had a lot of competitors, but everything in this show just looks so gorgeous. Give it a shot if you like looking at pretty drawings for 20 minutes at a time. Otherwise, don't even bother. 6 out of 10. I wouldn't classify any of the shows in this section as bad, just disappointing, and that especially follows for one of my most disappointing anime of the year. Buddy Daddies features a pair of bachelor assassins as they pick up an adoptive daughter from a hit gone wrong. And they learn to balance fatherhood with their underworld schemings and learn that there's more to life than womanizing in video games. It's a premise that's right up my alley, even though much of it is lifted from Spy Family. And PA Works certainly is the studio to make a show like this happen. But they messed this one up pretty bad. My biggest issue with this show is the misbehaving child Miri, who is a disaster and incredibly annoying to watch. And her disasteredness is not helped by the sheer incompetence of her fathers. What makes Spy Family work so well is how each member of the Forgers selflessly acts for the success of the mission, and by extension, the health of their adoptive situation. But everyone in Buddy Daddies is incredibly selfish and all over the place, and I just get the cringe every time I watch it. I cannot see how anyone would want to raise children after watching this show. 5 out of 10. Oof, leg falling asleep. Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is Science Saru's animated take on Brian Lee O'Malley's classic graphic novel series. It also features just about every significant actor from the 2010 movie Scott Pilgrim vs. the World who reprised their roles as voice actors. I'm not interested in discussing whether this show counts as anime or not, but because it doesn't show up on any of the popular online anime list services, I'm just not going to treat it as such. I remain a pretty big fan of the movie Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, even after its fanbase was revealed to be a bit embarrassing. I think it's a visual masterpiece with some of the best action scenes and gags that I have ever seen put to film. And while Takes Off isn't a televised rendition of the movie, I think it keeps the spirit of the original alive while cleaning up some of its less tasteful aspects. It's very 2023, and I happen to think that it makes a thematic improvement over the original. Some fans might call it a retcon to appease the feminist critique of the original story, but I don't think anyone should have a problem with this particular story as long as they understand that it stands independently from the graphic novel and the original movie. The best thing about this show is that it immediately presents why Scott and Ramona would be a compatible couple, therefore making Ramona a more dynamic and sympathetic lead and making the show that much stronger when she becomes our main character. In fact, all of the side characters become more dynamic and Takes Off than they do in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, and that makes the show just that much stronger. This show really nails its themes and also shows how a Scott Pilgrim story can be developed beyond its original conception. It does have some shortcomings, however. Being presented as an animated show makes some of its action scenes less impressive to no fault of its medium. But a more disappointing feature is how most of the celebrity cast just like mails in their performances. Anna Kendrick and Chris Evans being the exceptions. They go all in and it shows. So while I don't think that this show is as excellent as the original graphic novel or movie, I still think it's an essential part of the Scott Pilgrim canon. It would easily stand in my top 10 list for this year. Speaking of, The Angel Next Door Spoils Me Rotten features our two high school classmates, Mahiru and Amane. The two live next door to each other by themselves in the same apartment complex. Mahiru, tabbed as the school's angel, a beautiful and well-behaved girl who curiously doesn't have a boyfriend, and Amane, our sullen and quiet but sexy boy who the girls just haven't gotten to know yet. I require one low-budget, high-calorie rom-com to make my list every year, and this is the one. I need to point out that this show is bad in every notable aspect. The character design is bad, the backgrounds are bad, the music is bad, the plot is really bad. Unless this is your type of show, there is no reason I would ever recommend it to you. But it works for me because the chemistry between our two leads is incredible, and the show understands this by spending like 95% of its screen time on just these two. If only Horimiya would take notes. Don't watch it if you only like good shows, but for me it's a 7 out of 10. Mix tells the story of the Tachibana brothers, born on the same day to different families brought together by the death of parents and remarriage. It's not just a baseball anime, but one adapted from Adachi Mitsuru's latest long-running manga series. In other words, it is a show calibrated exactly for my enjoyment. But if you've been paying attention to this channel, you might know that I haven't really cared for Mix all that much. And earlier this year, I spent about 25 minutes explaining why. I will link below. So I went into season 2 of Mix with low expectations, and those expectations were justified for the majority of the season. The first 15 or so episodes of season 2 look the same and sound the same and engage me just the same as the entirety of season 1. And in a way, I think that made this part of the season worse than the first, as Studio OLM had many years to improve upon everything that they put out in the first season. But they just decided to turn out the same type of episodes as if they had no motivation or funding to do anything differently or better. So I was watching the show week after week, losing interest, and then all of a sudden, something changed. Through the last 5 to 10 episodes, the jokes got funnier, the action got snappier, and the emotional moments just got that much heavier. And after 40 to 45 episodes of an uninspiring baseball drama, Mix started to become good. It also nails its ending in a way that other anime adaptations of Adachi manga like Slow Step and H2 do not. That itself is a huge accomplishment and makes Mix a worthwhile companion to other adaptations like Touch and Cross Game. At least for Adachi fans, because I'm not sure I would ever recommend this show to anyone who hasn't watched either of those two shows already. But if I ever do a follow-up on my original Mix video, it's bound to be more complimentary this time around. 7 out of 10. Continuity? What even is that? Kusuriya no HORIgoto, or The Apothecary Diaries, tells the story of an apothecary's daughter living a commoner's life in Imperial China, before she is kidnapped and forced to serve at the palace, first as a laborer and then as a concubine's assistant. She is then given more and more responsibility as people discover her medical talents and intelligence, while she uses that intelligence to try to outwit everyone in gaining favor towards her eventual release. I initially wrote this show off after its first episode. I thought it had some tonal issues when discussing some really serious topics like kidnapping and slavery. And I also thought this was another instance of Chinese propaganda bleeding into anime seasonals, although that still may be true. But what Kusuriya no HORIgoto turns out to be is a multifaceted meditation on femininity and motherhood and power dynamics and class. At times being a workplace drama, a slapstick comedy, a medical mystery, and a whodunit. It's a period piece, but especially in its later episodes, it shares a lot more in common with House and Sherlock than it does with something like Downton Abbey. It's honestly a really tough show to pin down thematically, but at its best, it has something for everyone and is truly wonderful. I especially like the mystery aspects of the show, and it comes as no surprise that it comes from the same studio that did Odd Taxi. And our lead Mao Mao is a phenomenally charismatic detective, and less so of a love interest. That's where the show kind of falls short for me, as the lighter aspects feel kind of forced. I have no idea why we as an audience are made to care about a potential relationship between our eunuch Jinshi and Mao Mao. It's easily the least believable and most annoying will they won't they I've seen this year. But otherwise, I've been pleasantly surprised by Kusuriya and am looking forward to watching the rest of it next season. 8 out of 10. Skippin' Loafer is a high school rom-com that features our bumbling and lovable lead Mitsumi and our curious and fluffy and aloof Shima. Mitsumi comes to the city from the country to live a productive high school life on her path to serving the country in the government, only to find out that she needs to do some high school stuff along the way, like make friends, get embarrassed, fall in love, naturally with our tall blonde boy Shima. As far as shoujo rom-coms go, Skippin' Loafer is pretty much perfect. The character design is stellar, the scenes are gorgeous, and the narrative hits every plot point we expected to without being corny. We also get some wonderful side characters and big development laced into a tight package. My favorite subplot involving the friendship between Yuzuki and Makoto. The former being a classically beautiful but misunderstood girl who's just seeking sincere friendship, and the latter a misanthropic nerd who's surprised to find commonalities with a popular schoolmate. Fans of shoujo work will lightly have this show atop their list, and if I were a bigger fan of the genre, I might as well. I do think it slips up with some of the trans messaging from Naochan, but I will give it a little bit of credit for trying. And in my opinion, the show also suffers from not really having an edge to it, although I guess that's the case for every shoujo rom-com. But whether you're a fan of shoujo or not, you should give Skippin' Loafer a try. 8 out of 10. Surune is a sports drama from legendary animation studio Kyoto Animation, following our hero Minato and the rest of Kazemai High School's archery club. Kazemai has already qualified for nationals, but stands on uneven footing in the lead up to the main event. And so our boys face challenges, find new friends, and face new foes on the way to the top. I call the first season of Surune free minus the funny bits because it was a very dreary interpretation of a much better show. And story-wise, the second season doesn't really explore anything much differently than the first season did. But I give a lot of credit to KyoAni for figuring out what made this show really good and amplifying it to an incredible degree. Namely, the visuals and the score, which both might be the best I've seen in any KyoAni project. Better than Liz and the Bluebird, better than Violet Evergarden. This show just may provide the best sensory experience of any KyoAni show, and that's saying a lot. And if the show was all face and no brain like My Happy Marriage was, then I might not rate it as highly. But there's some genuinely wonderful side stories in this season, and I especially like the final competition at the end. One of anime's best kept secrets is that KyoAni really knows how to do sports. And here at the Kyoto Nationals, KyoAni really flexes all of their strength. It's not a masterpiece by any means, and I would never consider Surune among my favorite KyoAni projects. But the second season is at least a big step up from the first. 8 out of 10. Zom 100 features our overworked young salaryman Akira as his life falls apart as he enters the workforce in modern-day Tokyo, only to be resurrected when a countrywide zombie pandemic spares Akira from having to go into work. And he celebrates his newfound freedom by creating a bucket list to be completed before his eventual zombification. This is an adaptation of a popular manga series helmed by Bug Films, an anime studio that's heading its first show. And what a debut it is, for a few reasons. One, because the show with a batshit insane premise has a visual presentation to match, at least in the first few episodes. And two, because this show has gone through a production hell unlike any we have ever seen. Episodes were delivered hours late, not even halfway through the series, and then days late, and then just indefinitely postponed, only for the final 3 episodes of the series to show up on Netflix on December 25th, of all days. Merry Christmas, everyone. But they could have taken a year to finish the series for all I care. That's how much I liked it. Zom 100 is a zombie show in name only, as it prefers to examine the ills of the modern worker, highlighting the stress and isolation caused by exploitative companies in Japan and by extension elsewhere. It's very 2023, and it does very well to land in the canon of zombie comedies like Zombieland or Shaun of the Dead. Personally, I think it's even funnier with a lot of these jokes landing despite a very juvenile perspective. But the real treat of this series is in its visual presentation, especially in its first 3 episodes. It seems like the people at Bug Films really put everything they had into their first few episodes and the OP, and it really shows in its presentation. It makes avant-garde visual choices, the action feels heavy, and the saturated color palette pops really well. That ambition and commitment to its presentation kind of wanes in the final episodes, as I imagine Bug Films had to make some compromises just to get the final product out the door. But even with those compromises, the last 3 episodes still look and sound head and shoulders above your typical shonen action series. Surune is still probably my favorite visual experience of the year, but Zom 100 is certainly the most impressive. The show's biggest shortcoming, however, is its messaging. I love the premise and the carefree attitude our heroes present, but after its initial explosion, the show doesn't really have much to say about anything. Once Akira and friends get rolling, the show turns from a swashbuckling buddy adventure to a good guys versus bad guys fight, where the zombies and the zombie allies are the unquestioned bad guys, and anyone who opposes the zombies are the good guys. It feels a bit shallow, which I understand is the point of the premise, but it doesn't really do anything for me. Still, Zom 100 is a rollicking show, and I enjoyed every minute of watching it. I hope this show gets the resources that it needs to continue, and I look forward to continuing it if it comes to that. 9 out of 10. There's very little I can say about Spy Family that I haven't already said before. I'm not even going to provide a plot summary. You know what Spy Family is. And I'm also not going to provide much of a review because me and my partner are watching it, and as of recording, we are still many episodes behind. But I have seen the first few of this new season, and I like it just as much as I did last year when I ranked it as my second favorite show of the season. The first episode, especially with Lloyd and Yours Date, is one of the funniest episodes of anime I've seen in years. The show certainly has not lost its capacity for humor. Maybe this season will end up better than the first. Maybe it'll slip a bit. I don't really know. But for now, I'm going to recycle its already deserved 9 out of 10. Kimi wa no Hokago Insomnia, or After School Insomniacs, or Kimisomu, tells of the developing romance between our high schoolers Isaki and Ganta, as both of them battle insomnia triggered by specific childhood traumas that they still carry with them. Kimisomu is the latest seinen romance from the studio Linden Films, who killed it last year with Call of the Night. And while Kimisomu's presence and world is a bit more grounded, it's no less expertly told and rendered. I talked a lot about Kimisomu in my spring review video where I called it my favorite anime of this season. And it remains one of my favorite of the year because of its really grounded approach to emotional instability. And it remains one of my favorite shows of the year because of its grounded presentation and emotional look into mental instability. It's a very adult show despite Isaki and Ganta being high schoolers, and it just makes it that much more satisfying for an adult viewer. It's not a perfect rom-com, as a lot of the side characters leave a lot to be desired for me, but this was easily my favorite pairing of the year and one of the best romances I've seen in years. 9 out of 10. Only 2 left. Only 2 left. Soso no Frieren, or just Frieren, follows the journey of a seemingly ageless mage elf, whose story takes place in the aftermath of a world-saving adventure she had with a group of traveling friends. And it examines how she lives her life after each member of the party dies and leaves her with a new responsibility to take on in her new journey. As she creates a new company of adventurers, she learns what it means to make human connections and how powerful those connections and memories can be in her daily life. I don't usually care for fantasy stories, and I care even less for action-oriented drama, which just goes to show how much of an impact Frieren made on me. It is a devastating show, not just for how human it is, but for also how originally it presents Frieren's internal emotional turmoil, and for how it deals with really powerful subjects like the purpose of friendship and which creatures deserve to live and die, and the powerful instance of memory. And beyond that, it's just one of the most mechanically competent seasonal anime I have ever seen. Frieren demonstrates how perfect a show's visual presentation can be without relying on the gloss or the bombast of a Spy Family or a Zom 100, for example. You may have already seen gifs as wild as the fight between Fern and Lugner, or as placid as Stark just putting on a jacket. And they're both equally impressive in their technical execution, except those aren't just the only scenes, that's like the entire show. I also need to point out how excellent this soundtrack is. I think the music in Frieren, especially the score, is the best I've seen in any anime ever. Better than Listen to Bluebird, better than Your Name, better than any Miyazaki movie. It's just so magnificent. You need to give it a listen. The one thing that prevents me from giving Frieren a 10 out of 10, at least for right now, is the setting. I've never liked stories with medieval fantasy settings, even super popular and lauded ones like Lord of the Rings. Frieden might be the exception, but I still need to warm up to its setting. And that is of no fault of the show and should not dissuade anyone from giving it a shot. This season is only halfway through and will continue through the winter 2024 season. And if this show had reached its conclusion by now, I might have called it my favorite show of the year. I reserve the right later on to give it the 10 out of 10 it so richly deserves, but for right now, I'm going to give it a very strong 9 out of 10. Frieden may end up being my favorite show from 2023 once it finishes up in 2024, but I'm going to give my top spot to something a little different this year. And I admit, this may be more of a Lifetime Achievement Award than the true best show of 2023, but my favorite show of this year, without any further ado, is HORIgoto. A lot of this is informed by age, unsurprisingly, as there are vanishingly fewer shows that appeal to an adult audience anymore. A lot of this is also informed by circumstance, as the main theme from this show is Haida discovering unemployment in his late 20s. And I, too, was struggling with a bout of late 20s unemployment earlier this year. But beyond appealing to all of my buttons, HORIgoto was just really, really good. Again, for the 5th consecutive season. Everything about this season just felt so real and cathartic, even though a lot of online chatter didn't seem to agree. I think people balked at the idea of a season of HORIgoto focusing on Haida instead of Retsuko. Though, in my opinion, I think that was the right decision, if only because Retsuko becomes a fully formed character through her first 4 seasons, and Haida still has a little bit of emotional development to go. And Haida's loose ends and unprocessed trauma don't necessarily get resolved by the end of this season. And that's something about this season that I appreciated more than the first 4. I truly believe that this show got better and better as the years went on, with the exception of season 3, which gets a little weird for me. And though this may be an unpopular opinion, I think season 5 was the best season of HORIgoto yet. I talked about HORIgoto a lot more in my winter 2023 review. You can watch that below if you want some more information about why I liked it so much. But in conclusion, I think HORIgoto plays a lot like an optimistic BoJack Horseman, with painful life lessons interspersed with some of the funniest anthropomorphic comedy ever put to television. If HORIgoto is truly done, I give it an ovation and a hearty thank you. And I sincerely hope that HORIgoto provides the template for how shows targeted to adults can remain successful. HORIgoto, Season 5, strong 9 out of 10, my favorite show of 2023.